All right. So hello, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of Brain Binge. I'm Ellie, the co-director of Final Girls Berlin. We're a film festival showcasing horror made by women and non-binary filmmakers. And we're here to listen to Women's Trauma Within Horror Cinema by Moshaty. Thank you for being here. And yeah, if you have questions throughout the talk, you can definitely use the chat or, ask later on after the talk. Let me just introduce Moshaty real quick. So here we are. Moshaty is an Afro-Latina writer, producer, and lecturer working in the horror genre. As a core member of the Nyx Horror Collective, she continues to partner with Stowe Story Labs to provide a fellowship for women genre writers to over 40, and has also partnered with horror streaming giant Shudder Channel to co-produce the 13 Minutes of Horror Film Festival 2021 and 2022, and steadily looking towards 2024. Still engaging with her first love, short horror literature, her work can be found in a quaint and curious volume of Gothic tales out now, and Love the Sinner, coming in July both by Bridget's Gate Press and 206 Word Stories by Bag of Bones Press. Mo's 2-volume short story collection will be published by Spooky House Press in 2024. Mo has lectured on trauma and cinema with Prairie View, Texas A&M Film and TV program, Nazareth College, Horror Study BAF-SS SIG, and the University of Sheffield in the UK. All right, take it away, Mo.
Hi, everyone. So good morning. Thank you so much for joining me. So a couple of things off the top. I am recovering from major surgery and I came down with a cold. So hopefully everything sounds okay to you this morning. So please just bear with me. Again, as Ali said, I am a horror writer, lecturer, and producer in the genre. I'm also a cognitive behavioral therapist, and having a concentration on PTSD in women and getting to marry horror cinema and mental health is always a joy for me to talk about. And what I'm hoping this chat does today is kind of really energize you to look at these films in a different perspective of where women's pain has always been kind of mined for a seedling of a story, especially in the horror genre. I mean, the horror genre mines pretty deep anyway, but we've always really been centered that way. And if we can kind of touch on and honor those pieces and what kind of society has put women and women identifying people through, is we've really got to kind of pay attention to how we honor those stories, how we identify those stories, and how we kind of let horror give us more of a center stage. We're pretty centered anyway, and we kind of get that. I was just talking to Ellie at the top before everyone showed up. We had that famous quote from Jason Blum a couple years ago, which is like, women in horror, I don't know them. I don't see them anywhere. We've always really been centered with that. So hopefully, again, what this talk does is just kind of give you a different perspective on how that pain point has always been kind of mined for horror cinema, but always, to get you to rewatch a lot of these films. Some of them are classics, some of them are on everybody's top 10 lists, but also just to kind of give you a little bit of a deeper dive on how we're going to talk about today. I do want to say to the well-being of our viewers today, a little bit of a trigger warning. I am going to be talking about self-harm. I am going to be talking about rape. We're going to be talking about suicide and mania within this talk. So if there's ever a point where you need to mute, you need to step back, please do, and join us when you feel ready. So first thing that I want to talk about off the top, if I can, is what is trauma? So defined trauma can mean a stressful, frightening, or terrorizing experience. It's also what you deem as traumatic, or what your body deems as a traumatic stress to you. Now, we're all out here playing the trauma Olympics. Everybody's trauma is exponentially greater than the person next to me. And that's okay to feel that way, but it's also not okay to diminish somebody else's trauma. So these kind of traumas can be acute, which is resulting from a singular incident, such as assault. They can be chronic, which is repeated, linear, or prolonged, such as domestic violence, emotional, financial, racial, or other physical abuse. They can be complex, which is exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events of evasive or interpersonal nature. And all of these can result in post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's something we'll get into a little bit later. So now the reason why I want to state this here is because the traumas that we're going to talk about are going to fall within these 3 pieces, based on mostly from societal expectations, upbringing, brainwashing, by proxy, and interpersonal. And you'll hear me talk about the trauma as pain points, just to kind of quickly interject how these traumas are subtly woven into these stories, and we may not really notice them. And it's kind of horrific being a woman. So we've got a lot of fodder to mine there. And again, horror mine's pretty deep. So as we know, the presence in horror, female presence in horror has generated oodles of money for the genre, but also created a mainstay of horror focus. As women were the main protagonist, were the victim, the villain, the antagonist, and most of the time expendable. But within these roles, we can clearly classify them into 5 distinct categories. And that's possession, revenge, grief-stricken, objectification, and hysterical. Now, as horror is famous for, we can definitely have incredible subgenres here to all these, but we're just going to start with really broad strokes. So without further ado, everyone's favorite first up, possession in horror, or what I like to call complete control. And we're going to start with The Exorcist. Now, according to the printed word, the log line of The Exorcist is as follows. When a teenage girl is possessed by a mysterious entity, her mother seeks the help of 2 priests to save her daughter. Kinda. What's implied is that we have a story that centers Regan and her mother, Chris. But at the end of the day, what we really have is an overarching, orbiting story as to whether or not Father Karras is a good little priest. So we already have that bait and switch story kind of floating through the movie. And not to say that Regan isn't this enormous role in his confusion and absolution, but she's enlisted as a catalyst. So at the top, we've got Chris, who's a single mother. And many times it's implied that she can't handle raising her daughter alone in the city. Her daughter mysteriously falls ill. No one will listen to this woman. She's constantly being told to calm down, which always helps in every situation. But she's got a new partner who kind of steadies her ship a little bit until Regan unceremoniously throws him out the window. But she's got a lot on her plate, right? So her first trauma pain point is this constant societal pickaxe of, is she a capable mother? So when you have a woman being possessed in a horror film, and we'll get into other possessions in a little bit, but you have this complete lack of body autonomy. And through here in The Exorcist, you can view it as spiritual rape. And in that you can be used however wished or as brutally as begged, right? And you have this child being taken over by this demon, taking up all of this space within her. And this pain point really anchors Regan's role here as a vessel for terrorization. Your body is not your own. No matter how old or young you are, every move, every sound that comes from you is and will be controlled. And it sounds really exaggerated at the forefront, right? But growing up under the patriarchal press of seen and not heard, expected from women and young girls for centuries, it's got a pang of truth to it. Now, on a body brutality aspect, we have that incredibly hard to watch scene of Regan masturbating and puncturing herself with a crucifix. It's just really traumatizing stuff to watch, which I'm sure was traumatizing for Linda Blair to go through as a child. And even after everything is mended, the possession dust has settled, demons out the door, we still have that floating question of, how do you talk to a young woman about that? Or how do you talk them through that aftermath? Because after our priests have been absolved, after we've gone through this whole stage of good versus evil, and we had that seedling of Regan's story being kind of the whole point of this absolution, once that whole piece is done, whatever happens to her doesn't really seem to matter anymore. She's okay now. And I mean, we could rent The Heretic if we want to. We can kind of get into like what the next piece of her story is, but we still have that kind of floating around. And how do we begin to heal going forward without speaking on what that action births, which is shame. And shame being that last trauma point of this. So shame being really, really difficult to get over. And it's something that comes immediately kind of on the tails of being violated here. We've seen here both Chris and Regan more so being grossly violated. And Chris is this incapable mother who can't keep her daughter from harm. Regan completely controlled body and soul with no agency autonomy whatsoever, and left with the shame of that violation and working to move on. Absolutely no picnic. So a lot going on within The Exorcist, and there's about 3 or 4 more at closer inspection. but it's not intended to like name and shame this film at all, but to show how valuable that kernel of Reagan's story and that lack of body autonomy was needed in order to tell Father Karras's story. And women's trauma tends to be really mined for that, especially in this genre. And what I love about this film, and it kind of seems off the top, is like, here's my bugaboos and here's my pick-up points. But I think what's really, really fascinating is that you've got this really, really beautiful child. You've got this mother who's really just kind of trying to handle things. And all of those burdens become a little bit more, and not necessarily less important, but they become a kicking off point for the more centralized or nucleus piece of the story. So a couple of other possession stories that I have that I really kind of looking through was Fright Night. And Fright Night is that sexual possession piece. And you have Amanda Bierce's character, Amy, who's caught within the wiles of Chris Sarandon's Jerry character. And Amy is really, she's used as a plaything, right? She's used as a piece of bait to kind of bring the machismo out of Charlie. And she also has no body autonomy there either. I mean, it's a super sweet practical effects smile that she gives, which is kind of one of my absolute favorites. But we're really still talking about, that lack of autonomy piece with it. Burnt Offerings, Karen Black for me, 70s horror can do absolutely no wrong. I love this movie, and any horror movie that you can really get Bette Davis in is absolutely adore. But Karen Black's character as Marion is all consumed by the home, right? She's used as a caretaker to keep the home fed, to deter any further exploration, degradation, or reformation of the home. So again, another piece of vessel, another piece of lack of autonomy there. And one that's a little bit more recent, The Haunting of Bly Manor, which is absolutely agonizingly beautiful. Nobody writes emo horror like Mike Flanagan and Jeff Howard. But Danny's character, played by Victoria Pedretti, just tasked with being dragged through this alien entity's world in order to right their wrongs that have been done to them in love. So it's a really sad and burdensome existence that Danny has to go through. And if you've seen it, no spoilers, but it's a really kind of painful and grossly painful ending for Danny, but it's another instance of another woman's body being used to fit the rest of the story or to right someone else's wrongs. So Possession really, really relies heavily on a woman's lack of agency. So our next step out is revenge in horror, which is one of my personal favorites. And I want to chat about Audition. So logline here for Audition is a widower takes an offer to screen girls at an audition arranged for him by a friend to find him a new wife. One he fancies is not who she appears to be after all, so we can see a few problems right off the bat. Probably worst way to find a date ever, but Audition's one of my favorite movies on this list for me because it really speaks to masking what you're not ready for in a partner or in love set to horror music. It's really one of my absolute favorite movies. And to me, like, Audition is a love story. And it probably sounds kind of silly, but to me, it really is. And it's incredibly fascinating how this film accomplishes that. So what we're going to kind of talk through with pain points is this is kind of what I see within Audition, how they have the character. Asami kind of these two things kind of thrust upon her throughout this film through Shigeharu's perspective. So what we have at the center is the widow Shigeharu, who's instantly taken by Asami at the staged audition, which is basically this cattle call for potential mate set up for his friend. What I love about her is that all that she is able to represent in this film, it's highs and lows. It's a natural progression of how you present your absolute best to somebody when you are first meeting them. You have a lot of the same likes. You have a lot of the same characteristics. And then you start to kind of finally be human to someone, and somebody has to realize whether or not they want this human piece of you or not. But right off the bat, she's sort of saddled with being his next wife, for better or for worse. And he's really banking on it too. So why go through this audition process, this cattle call, and how absolutely embarrassing if it doesn't work out? But Asami's changing, and is his expectations of her changing? So you have to ask that question. That's always kind of gotten to me, is his expectations of her all the way up here, and she's just finally becoming human and now they're here and this is how he sees her? Or is she gradually kind of floating right into psychosis and really being who she really is, which is this, and presented as this murderous girlfriend? Now, he's using her as a crutch to move forward. And in the beginning, she's seen as very unassuming. She's very sweet. She's very eager to please. She's very put together, well-groomed and mannered. She is the Madonna. And that's the pain point one here, is to be as pure as possible for as long as possible. And she's making him feel younger, right? She looks good on his arm. He's feeling virile. He's proud to like have someone who looks at him this way. And then something kind of switches a little bit as we go on. There's an instance where they are in bed together where she begins to take a little bit of charge, right? She's turned on, she's enamored of him, he's enjoying us, again, feeling very virile, but her being kind of forthcoming sexually puts her in the opposite category of the Madonna, which is the whore. And that's that second pain point to me. It's don't have too much experience, but be eager to please. Now, I don't know about you, but most of us learn on the job. So this has always been a little bit of a weird thing societally for me, this piece. So it's always kind of thrown me. And I feel like at that point, his view of her kind of changes a little bit. She becomes a little bit more sinister. She becomes a little bit more deeper, a little bit darker. The coloring around her starts to change film-wise. Her mannerisms, her face becomes a little bit more pointed and angular. Her expressions get a little bit more terse. And what's interesting about this part is that she's warmed to him at this point. She's comfortable. She's felt really free sharing her past traumas. She's grown fonder of him. She wants a commitment. She's settling into something that she wants out of the relationship. But with each passing engagement he has with her, she seems to kind of degrade to him, right? She's becoming less pure. She's messier. She's too possessive. She's too clingy. And things that kind of happen naturally in a relationship with someone that you think also wants to be invested in you. You want them to kind of want only you. You want them to be a little bit more adjoined to you. I mean, obviously not to the lengths that Asami begins to go through them. And this is a little bit dangerous, but it's things that naturally happen in this relationship. And this is why I say that this is such a cool love story set to horror music. Because it's such a clear progression of what happens during a relationship when you kind of start to regret the relationship a little bit. And maybe that's just me. But maybe not to getting into this deeper exploration for it, but he's really backpedaling at this point. And he may not really be ready to commit to her as long-term as he wanted to. You know, he's kind of vilifying and seeing the worst parts of her, which we usually do when we want to justify splitting from somebody. And what's really key here is the projection that he has of his own insecurities onto her. You know, she's gone off the deep end at this point. We're getting into the torturing begins. He's got some, you know, shrewd dealings to make, right? There's the man in the bag. Obviously, she's done this before. But he's at this point where he's been guilted by his son a little bit. Why haven't you gotten married? He's been pushed towards it by his friend. And he's been led by his lust to kind of make this work. And it just isn't right for him. You know, she's not right for him. And perhaps there's no getting away with it, but he's got one more card to play, and that's the crazy girlfriend. So she's been viewed as this murderous, psychotic girlfriend to a guy just trying to have a relationship, right? But there's much more to it. And Asami doesn't really demonstrate these murderous traits until he's seen her kind of threadbare, you know, bones and all, as a living, breathing human. He's not idolizing her anymore. Warts and all, she's out. She's confessed her past sins, her past traumas, things that she's excited about, things she's worried about. And this gossamer bubble he's placed around her is really burst. And when you're not ready to deal with another human's emotions or needs, you will kind of start resent them and resent yourself, and you'll run. So clearly, in order to keep him happy, she's got to sacrifice everything she is. And our third pain point here is people pleasing. So amongst this incredible torturous love story, we've got this mess on interpersonal relationship trauma interlaced within, and for women, and I don't want to stress that this is purely just a problem that women face, is being hypervigilant or people pleasing in relationships, because we all do it for parental relationships, familiar, romantic. It's really incredibly damaging to put our personal boundaries aside, and our personal ability to self-soothe, because we're always kind of vigilant of who's the most unhappy in the room, or if our partner is unhappy or someone that is close to us is unhappy, we want to be really focused on how we can make them happy with the sacrifice of the rest of us, or the rest of our being. So it's just an excellent dose of it here in Audition, and that's how I've kind of always seen this movie, is really just a synopsis of how to backpedal out of a relationship that you're simply not ready for. And I've always seen Asami as someone who is not quite real. I see it as Shigeharu's insecurities. And as she's finally, you know, at the bottom of the stairs, and she's this quiet woman, and her expressions kind of go back to the first time he saw her sitting in the audition chair, and she's kind of softened a bit. She's less scary to him, and she's kind of gone back to this unassuming piece. And it's, you know, it's really food for thought as to, like, could it have worked out if you just given it a chance to see another human as another human? So I really like this story, and you could say that, no, that's kind of crazy, and that's fine. I'm fine being crazy. So a little bit with other pieces of revenge, which are a lot of my favorite movies. Obviously, Scream. We've got Mask Revenge. It's a absolutely perfect whodunit. It's had a great franchise. It's always somebody's something to beget something, and it's really, really well played and well laid out. But it does come off the back of Cindy's trauma of being, you know, the survivor's guilt, and a left behind trauma, and a child of murder. So it's really, you know, you've got that piece of it where she is really, we're having to kind of feed off that. I Spit on Your Grave, 78. Tough movie for me personally to watch, but as a rape revenge story, you've got, and maybe not for my extremers, maybe this is a movie that you're quite fond of, but it really is a lot of groundwork early. The character of Jennifer, who is, you know, one by one is picking off the violators for her, which is a hell yeah for me. But also we've got to have that really uncomfortable piece in the beginning. And that's really, really hard. And how many stories have we had of women being, you know, how many rape revenge stories can there be that are like this, where, you know, you are getting the retribution for that. But also we've seen really bad ones, right? We've seen, you know, the rape revenge where all of a sudden she's instantly a vigilante, because that's obviously the next logical step for my revenge story. So that's 78's a great one. There is a remake out there that I feel like 78's a little bit better of. There's a little bit handling of the story of, but that's a great one. Carrie is going to be my most favorite chaotic revenge with that. It's such a relatable story that I've never met anyone that's watched Carrie that did not relate to it some particular point. We've all been bullied, and anybody that's had a really tough childhood with their parents that's gone through a very strict upbringing, a very strong, strict, and sometimes violent religious upbringing. It's really, really easy to relate to this and see how things just sort of pop off for her. She really just wants a life for her own, and she's really kind of not seen in the ways that she wants to be seen in. And the only thing she has is this really guttural explosion to really deal with, you know, everything that's been happening. So again, that's my favorite. Extra couple pieces of revenge for that. So that's going to take care of our revenge. So next up is our grief and horror. And grief is really, it's a really heavy thing. And I don't want to be very light about it here. And we're going to touch on some things with it intertwined. And I don't have to tell you that grief is linear, that it's constant, that it's traumatic. But hopefully we can take a couple of deeper dives into how things are kind of laid out with this particular film. And we're going to talk about the Babadook. Now, am I the first person to talk about grief in the Babadook? Nope, not even the 331st. But what I really want to explore today is the deep societal trauma that not only plagues Amelia and her son Sam, but also the writer-director Jennifer Kent post-release, which is a little bit kind of like a case study, just really of how people view how a mother should be, and really kind of shamed her about this character, which is really interesting to me. So for the Babadook, a single mother and her child fall into a deep well of paranoia where an eerie children's book titled Mr. Babadook manifests in their home. Now, right off the bat, we see that Amelia is still kind of meandering through the stages of grief from losing her husband, tragically, on the way to having her son, Sam, who is now 5. She's harried with Sam. She's overworked. She's miserable. Her child's behavioral issues have alienated her family and friends, and she's merely going through the motions at work. Now, everyone's bugaboo with Amelia is that she's not moving on fast enough for their liking from her husband's demise. She hasn't made it through the woods to speak. And this makes her emotionally unavailable to take care of her other problem, which is Sam. Now, again, I don't have to tell you that death is traumatic, and how witnessing a death is absolutely, utterly devastating. But the first pain point here is living on somebody else's timeline and not processing grief. So Amelia is caught with looking like the house is still very well manicured and very well managed while inside it's burning. And she's at a standstill, right? She stops the wheel of grief. And as the introduction of the book comes through, both her and Sam deteriorate at different levels. It's not clear if Sam has delusions, citing the episode in the car, or if his inability to cope with fear is just, that's what it is. It's just his ability to cope just simply isn't there. Amelia's kind of falling apart at the seams, and with each interaction, they have this presence of the Babadook. Now it's well within the home. She starts to spiral hard. And unresolved traumas come flowing through the wall as like bugs, delusions on the television screen, and a very real close encounter with Sam and a chef's knife send her to the breaking point. She's got to learn to cope or she's going to die. And here's where I want to chat about a few exchanges that Amelia has with Sam. And we'll get to our second pain point. Sam tells a very ailing and sleepy Amelia, who's now well within the clutches of whatever the Babadook has manifested, that there's nothing to eat. And Amelia swiftly tells him, devilishly as well, why don't you eat shit? Now, Jennifer Kent got a lot of hate mail for that particular exchange regarding Essie Davis's portrayal of a mother under extreme duress, which brings me to pain point number 2, the completely unattainable goal of being the perfect mother. And what really baffled me about so many people in this absolute disbelief that someone could be literally at the end of their rope with not only their child or anyone, it gave me it's a real detrimental expectation to put that on a mother, a parent, anyone, to not lash out and be that deep down and just be absolutely done. And the fact that we still have a society of people who are putting so much expectation on being at all times, please be all times supportive, please at all times be witty and endearing, please have everything together. There's simply no room for self. There's simply no room to be a damaged and flawed human being if we're constantly putting this particular pressure on a parent. And I'm not letting Amelia completely off the hook. I mean, we do have a dead dog at the end of this, but spoiler, sorry. I want to kind of close out with pain point 3, and that's kind of Amelia disassociating herself from the grief. She has to make that separation. So when we've held on to trauma so long, we don't know if we can exist without it. And for me personally, this was a huge piece of the ending that was really, really personal to me. When you have loss in life, or you have something that a trauma that you're holding on to, you kind of learn to adjust around it, and you learn to live around it. You learn to exist within it, because heavy is easy. You can kind of handle that. And adjusting is the hard piece. Adjusting to somebody else, adjusting to a new schedule, adjusting to somebody else's different idiosyncrasies or somebody's other suggestions of a way to handle it. Those things can become uncomfortable. And that's really where she has to make this decision for it to no longer control her. And when I say the pain point of that third piece is that we are so conditioned to really, and I kind of want to touch on the first one as well, is we're so conditioned to move through things very quickly and be well adjusted so other people can find us easier to handle. And that's really hard, not only for a parent, not only for a woman, anyone, but what's really special here, and especially entwined with this grief, is that it's not a linear thing for her. It's just kind of constantly there, and how she's really stuck. And that demarcation of the two, finally, she gets to make the decision to have it no longer control her. And grief is very splintered. And for the horror genre, there's so much to mine in grief, right? It's not just emotionally, but like we've seen a lot of spirituality in horror, right? We've got the grief there. We've got it in psychological thrillers. And it's just a really easy hit, grief is. And just some further grief films that I really like, because we could obviously talk about the Babadook all day, and you've probably heard other people talk about Babadook all day as well. But I really like these other films, which are Prevenge, which is one of my personal favorites. Alice Lowe's character, Ruth, she's really struggling to cope with not only a fetus with homicidal tendencies, but she's also grieving her dead lover at the same time. So for her, she's trying to figure out how to navigate being on her own, being pregnant, being without the love of her life. And it's just a really excellent film. It's an indie hit. It's one of, probably when I first watched it, was one of like the most special films that I've seen, kind of regarding like having that piece of going it alone, is really cool. So if you ever get a chance to watch it, Hereditary, talk about generational trauma, am I right? Just a lot going on in that, and really stepping up to your rightful place in the mayhem, and having to kind of carry that on. And especially as Toni Collette's character is this mother who is always being kind of drowned out, and nobody's taking her into consideration. It's always like she's kind of screaming into the wind, and then finally when that time does come, it just all hell breaks loose. And Midsommar, it's with dismissible grief. And what I mean by dismissible grief is that that grief is always kind of set aside for Danny's character here. And it's really hard. This film was really hard for me to watch off the top, because she's met with extreme narcissism. And as someone who is a behavioral therapist, I recognize narcissism like that. So for me, it could have been a whole hour and a half less of narcissism for me. But the dismissal of her feelings is really difficult to watch. And it's an excellent study on grief. And I did not mean for there to be two Ari Asters here. Just, the man knows fucked up grief. So, I mean, it was a good place to really put it. But what's really interesting about all of these is that how they seem to bubble over at the surface. And all of them, I guess you could kind of think of them as not necessarily super slow burn horrors, but like that explosion of grief, and how each one of these are kind of handled really deftly at the end. Of like the last third of it is just really awesome to watch. So let's get on to objectification in horror. And this one's pretty fun to me. We're going to kind of run through this one pretty quickly, just because I feel like there's a lot of objectification in horror for just kind of bodies in general. But I want to get to a couple of other ones as we get through, like I've done with the rest. But this one, we're going to talk about Jennifer's body. So a newly possessed high school cheerleader turns into a succubus who specializes in killing her male classmates. Can her best friend put an end to the horror? I wonder. So I really adore this movie for several reasons. And I do want to kind of lighten it up a little bit, because it's got such fantastic metaphors for how women are viewed in society and how looks are like the best currency going around. And I love how they reverse engineer the film, starting with the aftermath. So Needy and Jennifer are childhood friends. Now, from the start, we're led to believe that this is completely implausible, because how could hot cheerleader Jennifer ever be friends with dorky Needy? But here we are. And Jennifer takes Needy to this dive bar to see the band Low Shoulder. And Needy's feeling a little bit out of place and having reservations, but she goes with it. And a fire engulfs the bar, but for some reason, Jennifer ducks out with the band, kind of leaving her friend all by herself. which is fine. And that's kind of how things start to really kick off. So Needy finds Jennifer worse for the wear in her kitchen, covered in blood and vomiting black murk. Now, after much expansion, introspection and inspection, and after about like a month later, a now very pale Jennifer regales Needy that Low Shoulder took her to the woods and offered her as a virgin sacrifice to Satan in exchange for fame and fortune. Great plan, except for Jennifer was not a virgin when they sacrificed her. So a demonic spirit has inhabited her body, and now she craves human blood and flesh to survive. Ta-da! Now, it's a really, really interesting look at it. And it's, again, a lack of body autonomy. Again, another woman being used as a vessel. And, here Jennifer's body, she said the name of the movie, is used as a vessel. And as much as Reagan was in The Exorcist, we simply cannot get away from that idea. It's an easy piece, using a woman's body for whatever. And it's completely plausible because it's been happening for millennia. So Jennifer is now this succubus making the run and a meal out of everyone. And Needy tries desperately to help her bumbling boyfriend out of the clutches of Jennifer. Obviously, he's not listening. And for Low Shoulder is now playing a school dance for a charity for all the bodies popping up around town, so they feel a little bad. And Jennifer's #1 on the guest list. So obviously they have a couple of tete-a-tete there, and we lose poor Chip. But there's a few minor points that we could touch on here, like the friendship adjacent and frenemy angle, which on an energetic level is completely taxing, and the lack of belief in women. Like, nobody's believing Needy that this is happening. But what's really glaring is that body autonomy issue that carries into another bucket here. Outside of possession, we're kind of still seeing it. We probably could stick it into every bucket that we have here. But what's really, really fun about this film is that it really kind of makes light of that particular situation. So a couple of other ones that I want to really touch on about that objectification here is no stranger to anyone. Forgot about Jennifer there. Is Rosemary's Baby. Again, no brainer for the lack of autonomy here. And this is a little bit of parallel to Jennifer's body, because Rosemary's offered up strategically to help her husband with his career. And that's the same thing that Low Shoulder really did for Jennifer. So I really like the inspiration, albeit light, the parallels there. Teeth, which is one of my favorite vagina dentata films out there. The unwanted advances getting nipped in the bud, so to speak. And Antebellum, I'm going to be honest, Antebellum, not my favorite here, but I want to talk about the racial objectification that's really, really strong in this film. Definitely notes of Octavia Butler's Kindred in here. I'm not super joyous about where it kind of lands, but it's definitely a different perspective, because we definitely think of objectification as being mostly sexual, mostly a woman's body, but really the racial objectification is something that we should be looking out in other films as well. And we saw that a lot with blaxploitation horror in the 70s and things like that. It's just kind of going back to that racial objectification. So if you're into those, definitely take a look. And lastly, I want to talk about hysteria in horror. So when I get to talk about mental health, especially mental health decline, it's really easy to navigate that into hysterical woman territory. So I'm really happy to talk about this film, and that is Relic. So when you get into other genres, you get into dramas or comedies, you have, the woman that is a little bit more aloof, and her aloofness makes her the butt of jokes. Or if she has a little bit of mental decline or, lack of mental acuity, she's mysterious now as a dramatic character. But here in Relic, which has such a strong footing and an advocacy for mental health decline and its research and all the trappings that come with it, and not only the horror of that, but how that horror permeates everyone around you, and it's haunting these 3 generations of women. So concerned daughter Kay rushes to her mother's home after a caretaker notices her mother Edna missing for several days. And with her daughter Sam in tow, Kay soon realizes the extent of her mother's mental decline. Pain point 1, right off the top, being the dutiful child. When her mother reappears muddy and disheveled with no details of where she's been, Kay, her helicoptering spins into overdrive, and as Edna's actions become increasingly disturbing, Kay and Sam realize that something in the house may have ill intentions. So very clear off the top of the film that Kay worries about her mother's decline. How long have we brushed it off until now? How responsible does Kay feel about that? Sam just wants her grandmother back. Edna's trapped and confused and running the gamut from paranoia to anhedonia. We have three women whose emotional motivations take them to the exact same place, and that's a lack of control. What's strikingly really beautiful about this film is the paradigm shift of that role reversal of parent and child. Pain point 2, Edna's lack of agency. Now, this is on the other side of that same body autonomy coin. She's needing to be watched more carefully. Her decline is taking her to different areas of her property, her home, her mind that's been hidden away from the rest of the world this entire time. And Edna's decline is really laid out so beautifully, and it's symbolized by this maze of walls within her home, the breadcrumbs of all the sticky notes that are an unmistakable metaphor for her memory loss and her difficulty with reasoning. And Kay has to assume the role of caretaker. And while juggling her own grown daughter, everything that comes with that is a lot. That's planning end of life care. That's planning burial. That's taking care of the daughter that's still very much young and healthy and alive. And it's all moving too fast. She can't catch up to this decline. And Sam is really helpless to kind of watch all of this. She can't pull Kay or Edna out of the clutches of this disease. And as she notices the mark of dementia on her mother at the end of the film, being pain point 3, hereditary curses. And this film really is a testament to Natalie, Erica James, and Christian White's writing, and how insidious dementia can really be. I'm a grandchild of a grandparent with dementia, and it's really, really difficult to watch. It's really, really difficult to live within that. And I kind of want to graze over a pinpoint that's not necessarily wholly surface here in the film, but between mothers and daughters, especially mothers and daughters that who are strained or that don't get on, is that blood is thicker than water, or you only get one mom. And I know there's thousands of us that have incredibly terse relationships with our parents, sometimes both of our parents, and especially when it comes down to something like elderly care. Even though the child is not close to the parent or never has been, or the relationship is quite bad, it's expected or looked down on that you are not taking care of your parent. Tell me why this woman has 5 children and nobody's upping to take care of her. Well, what's the relationships like? And that's really, really hard, because you put your own boundaries and your hard work of keeping your own self safe, emotionally and mentally, aside to just be the dutiful child. So I absolutely love this movie, talking about hysteria. And it's really, really heartbreaking kind of to watch this all go through, especially the things that Edna goes through, and the symbolism of dementia is just absolutely heart-wrenching to watch. But a lot of films for hysteria that kind of fall against, really rail against, or and sometimes fall into the trope is the Night House. And the Night House is really traumatic hysteria. I've categorized it, and I could easily have stuck this into the grief section. But it's really just a beautifully written film. And at its center, what I love about the character Beth and literally Rebecca Hall in absolutely anything, is that even though she's inundated with all of this information, when she begins to dig about her husband and is thwarted and lied to at times, she's still charges forward towards the truth and does not let that deviate her psyche at all. She's really, really steadfast in that, which I absolutely love, because this really could have easily been what they call, this is falling into the crazy lady territory. Black Swan, excellent film. I recommend this film to everybody that I can. It's a really, really brutal look at psychosis wrapped in the most elegant, beautiful package possible. And the decline of Nina sort of kind of undulates, and you really never really know where you are with this film, but you really are kind of enjoying the ride with it. And it's just absolutely a brilliant exploration of how insidious psychosis can be. And I think that that's just really, really well done here. Misery, I cannot say enough about Kathy Bates' performance as Annie Wilkes, probably my favorite Stephen King character, female character. And we're seeing it really in every frame with her bipolar, and the structure underneath bipolar disorder is very intricate, and it's not comic. It's arduous work to balance that every day. But you're seeing it really on full display here, and the extreme highs and lows that Annie displays are a really, really excellent watch throughout this film. So I really hope you enjoyed the talk today regarding horror mining women's trauma for storytelling. And I'm really honored room was made for me to do that here. I mean, I love horror. I'm never going to stop watching it, writing it, or consuming it in all its forms. But as a therapist, I think for me, it's important to remember where it came from, and honor the pain and process that women have gone through to give us those incredible seeds that become incredible films. So thank you for that. And before I leave you, I hope you do consider donating to Final Girls. Hopefully they have dropped their donation links in the chat. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into this weekend. So the least we can do is to give them a few ducats and dollars. Also, please think about donating to your local state or province women's shelters. Also donating to any LGBTQ plus youth organizations. I know it's June, it's Pride Month, but please consider donating that all year long. And I think that's it. That's it for me. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much. This was great. I mean, for a talk on trauma, this was quite delightful, I must say. You managed to do that. Yeah. So yeah, people have questions. Here you go. This is your time.
Oh gosh. I'm gonna be real gross and just wipe my nose off cam. 1 sec.
Okay. Take your time.
All right, and she's back.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe it's like quite a broad question to begin with, but as a trauma specialist, I'd be interested to hear why you think horror lends itself so well to depictions of trauma.
Oh, excellent question. I think that it's I think it lends itself well because there's nothing scarier than the truth. And there's nothing scarier than, pardon me, I can feel my voice kind of slipping away from me. There's nothing scarier than the truth. And there's nothing scarier than not knowing if you are fully all there, or what you're experiencing is something that someone else has experienced. And like I said, there's different levels to trauma. It's what you deem traumatic. And it could be an isolated incident. It could be something that's broad expanding, and it's something that every single human goes through. And I think that horror does an amazing job of mining every singular trauma that there can be, and thrusting that upon a human being and seeing, let's see what sticks. Let's see how they can operate within that. And I think that I'm so happy to be part of this genre and working within it. I think it's an easy thing because every human goes through it. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. Yeah, definitely. It's so entwined. Yeah. John Ann Klein, you have a question? Do you want to ask yourself, or okay?
Yes. You hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, great talk, by the way. It was wonderful. And my question is connects really to the question from Ellie before, because I understand the connection between horror and this psychological subjects in the horror theme. Actually, is this what I prefer the most in horror films anyway. But I hear always the question, when is the horror film too much for people, or the subject? And you talked so much about this, like the movies you talked about, what you talk about, like that's they're picking up the traumas or the subjects. And when would you say this is okay to watch it because it's kind of helpful in a way? And when it's too much, well, where's the line in your opinion?
Like where would be like the trigger line?
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
And that's an excellent question, and it's something that, you know, I've thought about for myself, even for myself. Like, I'm an assault survivor, so for me, it's watching rape revenge stories are just like, oh, maybe you know, I can make it through those, but I think that it's really on such an individualistic level, because there's nothing wrong with shutting it off, and there's nothing wrong with being like, I can't. But what I want people to do, and especially, and that's such an excellent question, what I want people to think about, especially if they have a trauma and they're faced with, you know, watching something that they're, you know, they may be interested in, and they really wanted to kind of see how far they can get with it. Like, don't make it a challenge for yourself. Like, don't, you know, I got 15 minutes into it, yay. If you really aren't in a place where you can accept that outcome, that's either similar to your own outcome or more extreme than your own, then I would just say don't. Just kind of for the safety, for your own well-being, because it could do one or two things. It could, on a positive level, you could be like, okay, like I can handle that, and maybe I can baby step into something else. Or it could do a little bit of a detriment, which is kind of take you backwards in your healing and kind of place you back in that same thing. Yeah. And now that movie becomes a trigger. Do you know what I mean? So we've kind of added something else. So it really has to be more on your own gauge. And like I said, there's nothing bad with shutting it off, nothing bad with trying, and, you know, saying that that this is not going to work for me. Like, one of my biggest fears is home invasion, and I got through The Strangers by the skin of my teeth. Absolute skin of my teeth. So that for me was hard. Like, would I try? Am I a huge home invasion movie person now? No. But I, you know, and I didn't challenge myself to complete it either. I was able to do it. So yeah, more on an individual level. Don't make it a challenge. Turn it off if you need to, and there's no shame in not completing the movie.
Yeah, that would be the advice to give to others too. So if 100%. People ask you, okay. Yeah, thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah, I also really loved your categorization of everything. Maybe it's also because of your background, you really went into the specifics. But I do have just a few terms you mentioned that I would just want to hear more about, like amends possession and chaotic revenge.
Yes. So what I love about amend possession, I kind of stick in a category where somebody or some character is used to get something else done for another character, or to complete another character's story. If you think about it, at the end of the day, Reagan could be considered as amend possession. She's kind of tying up a story. But what I love about that category is the fact that you can't have that trauma piece. You can't complete your story without it. You need somebody else to do it. Somebody has to make amends for you because you're incapable. You're a spirit, you're an entity, you don't want to get your hands dirty, things of that nature. And I love those types of stories because when you think about it, at the end of the day, most possession stories are amend possessions. You know, things that are trying to get, you know, things done. People, you know, spirits that can't speak for themselves. So people have to do that. I mean, think of something like The Changeling, you know, where he's got to, like, you know, make sure that, you know, problems are solved, or, you know, like the Ghost Whisperer, where like spirits come back so you can solve my case. Like, that's where you have more of this like amend possession coming through. And chaotic revenge, I think, is just like absolutely balls to the wall, explosive. Like, there's no going back after this. Like, we're burning it down. And I think nobody really does that better than Carrie. She's you know, that's it. You're done. You're toast. Stick a fork in you. And there's a lot of chaotic revenge like that. I mean, if you think like Planet Terror is like that. You got Grindhouse, that we were just really like kind of killing them all and getting rid of things. I love that in a movie, because then there's no chance of a sequel. There's like, the story is the story, and it's contained, and it's bananas. And I love that in revenge horror. Absolutely adore it. So hopefully that explains
definitely. Yeah, thank you.
For
Thank you
you.
for elaborating.
Yeah, 100%.
Kat, I
100%.
think you have a question.
Hello, first of all, well done for doing this whilst physically compromised. It was really good.
All right. Making it through.
I was just wondering about the film Smile. That was quite recent because
yes.
I had what are your thoughts on that? Because I thought that really conveyed how childhood trauma feels as an adult.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
it's really underrated for that, and it sort of on the surface doesn't look like a particularly good film, but it really feels authentic.
Yeah.
I thought.
Yeah, I mean, Smile, I would probably stick in the grief category, because you've got in there is that piece of childhood trauma, and also trying to, because grief does not always have to deal with loss per se. But what I think about with Smile is, because you have that story that kind of carries through, and almost amend Possession, really, if we kind of marrying the two, kind of has to carry through. What I think about that, I mean, I'm completely, admittedly, Smile's not one of my favorite movies. But I think the idea that you have there is that you have that really hard and crucial piece of how trauma shapes the way we navigate as adults. We have learned behaviors and learned survival skills as children to when we are met with this trauma, whatever age we have it, whatever it intersects with us, we make those concessions for our life, and we create parameters to navigate them. And when something comes in and it disturbs that, we have to pivot, and we have to have some whole different way of surviving. And that's something that I think that, and Katrin, that's a really excellent piece there that you've kind of delved up for me, because seeing it from that perspective of just being like how insidious it can be, makes, I mean, for me, the film was just, it was very, there was pieces of it that were quite sad. And there's nothing, first of all, there's nothing worse. And it was kind of like the piece of like, It Follows. We're just trying to like scramble around, and we're trying to get rid of whatever's here. It really makes me think about how many excuses, and not to say that Smile, this film in particular, but how many excuses we make for ourselves and give ourselves to not confront and navigate a new space. So for me, like, I would probably stick it in either like amend Possession or grief. I'd have to think about that, though. That's excellent.
I thought she does try and confront it eventually. They do try and deal with it, and then it doesn't work, and fails, and it sort of swallows them up. But it's just like interesting how it can like crop up and be triggered everywhere. Like when the people start smiling, the smile, that's kind of like, oh, it's just like now it's here again, and it never lets you go. But it's also, I thought there's a difference between films where you get some kind of progress or resolution, like even in Spit on Your Grave, like the revenge films, you kind of get something towards that, whereas in Smile you didn't, and in Midsummer you don't really, because she sort of just disintegrates and sort of dissolves into
we're doing this now.
Yeah.
But no, that's I'm actually will stick that, because I think that for Smile, that makes I mean, it's a movie of a constant trigger, so it just really makes sense to kind of add that to my repertoire. So I appreciate you putting that on my radar for me.
My pleasure.
Got it.
Sarah, you have a question?
Yes. Hello, Mo. Thank you for this excellent talk.
Thank you
so much to delve into here. I was wondering, this isn't even really a full question, but more like what your thoughts are about directors who induce trauma in actresses to get that performance.
Yes. So I actually have a friend who named Amy, who was in a recent movie with Will Wheaton, Rent a Pail, and she is a advocate for sensitivity, for people being on set for sensitivity for actors that are in very explosive situations, dangerous situations, really hard pieces of a script, because I think that piece needs to be it has to be there for actors. You're having, people that are in rape scenes, you're having people that are being assaulted, you're having people that are going through really torturous scenes in this genre. And there's got to be something that creates some sort of safety for them, source of word. And I'm not saying that there's nothing in the industry that's like that. I'm saying, kind of going through, and I think your question might be coming up through the decades where that wasn't a supported thing, where it was really give me that trauma. I mean, we I don't know if everyone's familiar with, the thousands of takes that Kubrick put Shelley Duvall through for The Shining. The absolute monstrous trauma given to Tippi Hedren for The Birds from Alfred Hitchcock. It's really, it's agonizing. It's makes, I'm not going to say that makes my job harder, but it does. It definitely gives me a pause, especially working on something like this, because I have to think, especially where The Exorcist is involved. And I'm sure we've seen like just some BTS documentaries on Exorcist and everything that Linda Blair went through with kind of thrashing around the bed and, really hurt her thorax. Ellen Burstyn actually has had a lifelong back injury from that. And it was just like, keep going. I think that we have to be really, as writers, I think from a standpoint, it's going to begin with us, because we want that action, we want that scene very badly to carry through our story. Secondly, it's going to be our directors and our producers. It's going to be also our sensitivity readers, because even if we want what we want out of a scene or out of a story, there has to be a way to go about that has the best interests for the mental health, mental well-being, and the physicality of our actors that we're asking for, but also making sure that everybody feels safe within that scene. So I feel like it's an absolute shame. It makes me very uncomfortable as a human being, that it was like, give me more. I don't care if you have to break yourself to get it. That's hurtful to watch. And I think that we've all kind of, now that we know that that's happened in this movie, watching this particular movie again, you're just like, I kind of enjoy it less. I think going forward, and I think that's the only way that I can really speak to it, is making sure that we understand that the outcome of the story is not more important than the human being that is giving it to us. And that's really the only thing we can do, right? I mean, I think it's just making sure that human that is on the line, and I sound like I'm going to cry about it, but I'm not, because I'm just losing my voice. Just on the line. That the human that's being put, in that and through that is kept as much out of harm's way emotionally and mentally as possible, because that's really, really important. Bodies can heal. Sometimes minds are very slow going on that.
Yeah, not to make a major generalization here, but I think that this is one of the things that I really appreciate about watching contemporary horror by female directors, non-cis male directors, is that I can usually watch with like a better ethical sense that the performers are being treated humanely.
Yeah. And it's, and then in the same breath of that, or just to kind of piggyback off of that, it should be mundane, and it's not. And I think that's the area we need. That's our area of opportunity, is we need to fix that. It shouldn't be like, oh, that person's taking care of their actors in these really, really terrifying horror scenes. It should be kind of across the board. Hopefully we can stop applauding people for doing what should be, old hat at the end of the day. But yeah, I agree. Hopefully that answered your question, Sarah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course.
Do we have any other questions from the audience, or anything, Mo, that you would maybe want to say as well? I don't know, that didn't have time to, or
no, I think I said a whole lot.
Yeah, just out of curiosity,
sure.
In your research and everything, do you have any book tips, maybe things that really inspired you to do this, or in general? Because I'd be interested in.
Yeah, just per research. Oh God.
like horror and trauma. Yeah. And
there's so many. I honestly would have to kind of leave it on Twitter because I'm gonna go to my bookcase and look right now.
okay, we'll tweet it then. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'll definitely make a list because there's a lot to this is incredibly truncated. And I'm actually working on a nonfiction book with these topics, so I can get really, really broad. Or really, really stop being very, very broad and get much closer to dissecting a lot more. But I think the more curious you are, always pick up a director's book. Pick up if there's a movie that you enjoy and they did it well, and you can spot those types of things out of it. You buy the original story, buy the director's catalog, buy a book on the film. You're going to learn a lot from how this story became what it was. From that, but also really being mindful of, not looking kind of too deep at things. I mean, for me, I've always kind of have my therapist hat on when I watch things, and I'm trying to put it down and enjoy things. But I think that if you're really, really interested, and not like I'm trying to make like a big fun game out of things, but if you're really, really interested, how spot what you resonate with when you watch a horror film. And a lot of us watch it just simply for the enjoyment of wanting to be thrilled or be scared or, something to kind of think about further down the line. Think about what resonates with you and what hurts you through the film, or where you started to get uncomfortable. And you will start to really uncover what those underlying themes are and what those underlying pain points are within the story. And once you start to see that, you will start to see that through line through a lot of other movies. And that's why I say, like, the horrors or the pain points and the trauma points that women have, like, obviously we've got like a laundry list and of things that they can really pick off of. The more you resonate and with what your uncomfortability is within the film, the minute you start to feel unnerved, make a note of it. Just make a mental note of it. And then you'll kind of start to see where those threads bind, and you'll probably start to be, oh, that's my favorite film. Oh, that's my favorite film. Oh, why? Because it resonates with me deeply. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize I wasn't, that was unresolved, or I wasn't going through that, or I had experienced this before. And you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised what movies you like and what movies you're to stay away from John Ann's point, what to kind of, nope, I'm not going to watch that. But hopefully that helps you to do that. And I'll leave a list on Twitter about some books that I recommend that marry the two, because there's a lot of really great ones out there. And now I'll try to give them a couple of links where you can buy them. Amazon, obviously, but if we cannot put more money in Jeff Bezos' pocket, that would be great. But no, I really don't have anything else to add other than hopefully this resonated with a lot of you. Hopefully it energized you to have like just some interest in just kind of looking how prevalent trauma is through horror stories, and hopefully you watch more horror out of it. So that's it.
Yeah, not to end this on a downer note. I mean,
downer. That's my job.
But just I'm wondering, on a general level, I guess, what do you think is most misunderstood about trauma? Also, how it's depicted in film and horror. But what are you tired of seeing?
Oh, the rape revenge to vigilante. That's my big one. It's like, this doesn't happen. I mean, maybe in some countries it does, but it's not the way it usuly should go for healthy healing. Because there's I also work with a lot of women's shelters. I have a syllabus I run a class to deal with trauma called Women in Trauma and Women in Stress. And just seeing a lot of, and especially for myself, who, like I said, as an assault survivor, it's not where I thought of going. But also what I don't like seeing either is early dismissal of people trying to work through things. And what I mean by early dismissal is that when you have a traumatic incident, regardless of what it is, if it's chronic or singular, there's always going to be something that kicks it up, regardless if you're just like, oh, I'm 100% over it, I'm 100% healed. There's always going to be something that is going to trigger you out there, and it's your emotional reactivity is what you kind of have to get a hold on. And it's how you react to that situation. So people being kind of aghast at people still having that gap of emotional reactivity, and not giving people like leeway in movies, like people obviously thinking that, oh, she's emotionally overwrought, she's hysterical, and not giving that space that we would give to like a male character. You know, male characters get to like pop off and bust and shoot people up all the time. Like, somebody killed my girlfriend, I'm gonna blow up an entire city, and that's totally fine. But you know, a woman can't, you know, have an emotional outburst, or she's, you know, she's absolutely certifiable and she's going to the pen. So I feel like if we can just kind of get more smarts and intelligence and do your own research on mental health. And mental health is a very, very heavy, serious thing. And it's we can be very lighthearted about it, but trauma is a really heavy thing to carry. So I think that if you can be mindful of those people that you know around you that have experienced it, you yourself be mindful about you yourself, be kind to yourself, and make your journey a healthy one, and don't rush to be done, because that doesn't help anybody. But as an upper, my book comes out next month, so yay, everyone.
Excellent. Share it with us, and we'll share it on our social media.
Kick it back up to smiles. But thank you so much for everybody for joining me this morning. I was worried that it was going to be really heavy material, that people wouldn't have any questions about it. They were going to be like, why are you talking about this? But I'm so glad that my voice held out and that my nose didn't run very much during this segment. So again, thank you to the Final Girls team, and thank you for joining me, everyone, this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mo. And yeah, thank you everyone for staying. Yeah, this is just the first talk of the day. At 4, we'll have a historical horror behind the scenes of Kindred with Adia Colors, the Ghosts of Gothic Art House Cinema, Sam Deegan's talk at 6, and then our maternal horror panel at 8. So looking forward to seeing you all there as well.
Thank you all so much. We also have an in-person festival every February in Berlin, so that'll be February 8th to 11th of next year. And we have some best of screenings happening in different cities, which we'll advertise as well. So thanks so much for being here. And also, all the times are Central European time.
Yes, Berlin time.
This is all Berlin time. Yes, so thanks for joining us from your time zone, Mo.
Yeah, it's fine. It's up anyway.
Great. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.